Welcome back to Cybersecurity in Focus, the podcast brought to you by Seacon Cyber. I'm your host, Katie Watson, and today I'm joined by Keith Price. Keith is the Director of Security at National Highways. He has 2 decades of experience in the US Air Force and leadership experience spanning the Middle East, Europe, and across government, consulting, and enterprise. This episode is full of a lot of wisdom. Keith is one of those rare security leaders who has sat on every side of the table: military, supplier, consultant, internal CISO, and it really shows in how he thinks. In this episode, we get into why people come before process and technology, how to build a security culture that actually sticks, the no-blame approach to supplier relationships that most organizations are still getting wrong, and why the best defense against a cyber attack might, in some cases, be a torch, a radio, and some cones. So without further ado, let's get into it. Hey, Keith, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, good morning, Katie.
Okay, so this is a very exciting conversation. I've been looking forward to it all week. You have so much experience. You've spent 2 decades in the military. You've worked across UK, Europe, and I think we're going to have a lot to go through in this conversation. So I'm going to dive kind of straight in. Starting at the start of your career. So it was back in the military. You operated in a lot of pressure in that role, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I joined the U.S. Air Force. I was 17 years old. The furthest I'd ever traveled at that point was into Canada as a teenager. And so it was quite exciting to be sent over to the UK as an 18-year-old. I started out working in munitions, pretty much did that my whole career. But because of dealing with explosives, the IT folks asked a few of us to help out with some of the IT stuff in the explosive storage areas. Plus, I had received training on how to be a mainframe operator. We had some IBM Z mainframes that were connected through what used to be called the DARPA net, which was like the precursor to the internet. So I'm dating myself a little bit here now. And it allowed the military to establish communication with other mainframes across Europe and also academia, so universities that we were working with on research and development. And I joined during the first Gulf War, right in the smack middle of things that was happening over in Iraq and Kuwait. Spent some time in the Middle East supporting that engagement. And then really over the next 20 years of the Air Force, it was just from one sort of conflict to another conflict, Afghanistan, back to Iraq. I spent over 20 countries that I operated in over that 20-year period. But it was very exciting, and I got to do a lot of things, play with a lot of the latest technology. As you can imagine, the U.S. military always has the best and latest technology, and got to work alongside some amazing people, to include a lot of our allies, Europeans and folks in Asia and the Middle East, people from other nations. And that also helped broaden my horizons. It helped me understand the global perspective as Americans, and I think we see it now. There's a very much tunnel vision on America first and this and that. Being able to travel the world and meet and interact with other cultures, I think benefited me more than any other education I've had in my life.
That's incredible, and it's such a wealth of experience that you've gained from it. And how is that translated now into your role as a chief of security?
Yeah, so I am heavy on the people side of things. So, we talk about people, process, technology. For me, that's kind of the order of things for me. I think a lot of leaders, not just at security, look at, their options from that perspective. I place a lot of perspective because I've had this interactions with so many different cultures. From an early age, I saw the importance of, diversity in teams. And diversity is a broad statement. It's a broad definition. And so as an example, when I was working in the Middle East, in the UAE, I worked for a company and I came in and they had already started building the team. And it was about 30 people on the consulting advisory side of the team and 17 different nations, about half and half women and men makeup. And that was by far the best team that I'd ever worked in. We had diversity of age. We had diversity of background to include socioeconomic. And so, again, I would have lunch with my teammates, and it was really about picking their brain, because as an older, grayer guy, I carry a lot of bias with me. And it's a very dangerous thing to have as a security leader, is to hold and carry this bias with you, but it can't be helped. And so what you have to do is you have to force yourself, and it shouldn't be a force, but it works well, is to go and talk to people to get their experiences, to get their understanding, and to get their opinions on things even. And it's important to make sure that you advocate for people to speak. And so for me, if I'm in a room and we're having a team discussion, I will quite purposefully sometimes pick on somebody that I know privately we've had great conversations, and I'll say, "Hey, you've had some great ideas about that. Why don't you tell the group?" And it helps build their confidence, right? It helps build their own skill set, their soft skills in delivering new and amazing ideas to a bigger group. So for me, again, it's about the people looking after mental health. As you know, security can be very stressful, especially in secure operations. So we just want to make sure that we provide a safe place for people to work, but also a place that challenges them.
That's brilliant. And you mentioned, bringing people, getting them to speak. We have seen an interesting shift now to work from home and more virtual environments. How do you still encourage and build culture, even if it's on Teams, for example?
Yeah, so we try to meet in our team environments, a few times a week or a few times a month. And it may be at National Highways offices or it may be at a supplier office. We quite often will meet in some of our places that are geographically make sense for the team. So it's more central than a highways office. We also do virtual events. We do what's called cyber coffee once or twice a month, and it's open for anybody to join us. And what we'll do is we'll pick something that's in the media that relates to security. We'll convert it to lay people talk because we know that we have the non-cyber people in the room. And it's usually about things that impact people's families, their children, their teenagers. We look at things like social media and how that has impact. And it's not necessarily cyber at highways. And so we get people to come in and encourage them to join us in these discussions. They last for about an hour. And again, we're having coffee. We do, these sessions that are meant to build the culture, the engagement, the awareness, but from the employee's perspective in what really is important to them, which is their families, their friends, and their own cyber safety and security. We also do lunch and learns where we have some very smart people in our teams, decades of experience in things like architecture and engineering and culture and awareness, education, and so forth. And then they will lead a session, a lunch and learn session about their topic. And the topic might be a technical one, or for me, I like, again, talking about people. How do we develop and build teams? How do we provide safe spaces with emphasis on mental health and so forth? So we have a bit of a mix of the physical when and where we can, but also maintaining virtual environments. And then finally, we encourage a lot of banter in our teams spaces. And so I'll throw something out. There's a story in the news and I'll throw it out and I'll throw a bit of a sarcastic comment in order to get the conversation going. And then people start adding to it and we'll have a bit of banter across our teams chat that way as well. So it is tough. And, I do respect remote working. I think or hybrid working, probably more truthfully. I think hybrid working is really here to stay. It's the best balance for people's home life and their professional life. And it's the best balance between having the in-person interactions in the professional setting and giving people the ability to take care of families and, whatever they may have going on in their personal lives alongside their responsibilities to their organization.
I have to say, I have seen your LinkedIn, Keith, and there has been a few times maybe they've been a little bit of a sarcastic comment. They've given me a good chuckle on some of your
Yeah,
posts.
it's I am a dinosaur, but I also see, and there's cultural differences too. So again, my homeland of America, there seems to be more of an emphasis on return to office. And I think we all kind of know the real reasons behind return to office. No matter what senior leaders and CEOs and things say about, oh, we have to have a collaborative, and we have to have water cooler moments and things like that. Okay. But the reality is a little bit different. And that's where my sarcasm shines. I think here in the UK and Europe, there's a little bit more of a respect for work-life balance. Highways, especially, is a really great place for that. In 2.5 years, I think I've gotten a couple calls outside core business hours. Security person, we're always connected to our devices anyways, but there really is more of a respect in the UK and Europe. And in fact, there's a meme that goes around where it says, we have, 26 days of annual holiday, and we laugh in European when we're going off on holiday, whereas the Americans may be expected to stay connected to work even if they're on the beach, supposedly relaxing. So again, it's I have this mind, I've lived here 30 years in the UK and Europe and overseas, but I still have the American view, or I still see the view from the Americas. To be fair to America, they've been quite successful in working hard, but I think they've just shifted a little bit too much into the work hard too much area.
It's definitely a balance between this
Yes.
really extreme hustle culture, always on, and also then building a life where you're happy and you can relax and you've got things outside of work. And you touched on mental health because that is such an important thing in this industry. It's something where you've got a high pressure job, you need to be on in the moments you need to be on. Managing mental health for your employees. Do you have any advice for anyone who's like a head of IT or a CISO listening to this on how to take care of their employees?
Yeah, so I tell a story where I had an employee. He was like my top person, the top performer, the most well respected, the most popular. This guy did it all. And then over a space of a couple weeks, his performance dropped. He was coming to work late and things like that. So I says, "Oh, something's going on, right?" So I said, "Let's go for a walk." Went for a walk. And I says, "Hey, if you don't mind sharing with me what's happening. We definitely noticed something's going on in your life." And he was going through a divorce. His wife had asked him for a divorce a couple weeks. And I says, "Oh man, I've been there. I know how tough it can be for both parties in the divorce. But what we need to do is we need to be able to back you up at work, so that you could concentrate on dealing with this personal thing." And so I said, "Do you mind if we talk to the rest of the team? If you don't want to share specifics, we could keep it." And he says, "No, no, and then everyone's going to find out about it anyway." So we had a little powwow with the team, and everyone says, "Yeah, yeah, we'll pick up your tickets and we'll help, you go do what you got to do." And that happens, life happens. People get sick, people have kids, there's deaths in the families, people want to go and do training and development. And so I think as a team, if we can come together and be open and honest with each other and care for each other and look out for one another and back up people when they need to take time away from the job, it just creates a culture of trust. It- and when people trust each other, when they trust the person to the left and the right of them to, should the worst happen, that they don't have to worry about the work stuff. They can unplug from it and go take care of life. That I find tends to build greatness in teams because it's sort of a foundational block to everything else you want to do within that team, whether you want to transition to a new technology, whether you want to expand out into the wider company organization, the engagement, the awareness pieces. And it's important also to lead by example, right? So as senior leaders, I can't go to my team, "Well, it's important that you take care of your personal life." And then when I'm having my own challenges, I keep a stiff upper lip and could stay at work, and I've tried it a few times. I've had tragedy in my life last year where I was still going to work, as it were, and my peers said, "No, go away, take care of your family tragedy and take care of you and your family." And, help providing the counseling, providing the access, the pointing to that type of counseling. So mental health is important. Again, it's not just a cyber thing. I think if we look across the business, most of the time when people fail, like a phishing or a social engineering attempt, it's not malicious that they failed it. It's not laziness. It's because they're under pressure. They're under stress. And attackers know that they can leverage and take advantage of that stress. And so quite often we'll fail to these social engineering attempts because we're so burnt out and stressed. I just want, "Oh, this person just needs this thing. Oh, the IT department is contacting me. I'm just going to give them what they need so I can get on with my job, And then before you know it, the attackers are logging in with those stolen credentials, and again, it wasn't malicious. It was through stress and overworked employees. And so security, we have a responsibility to work with HR, to work with health and safety departments, facilities departments to integrate and contribute to the safety and employee wellness programs too, because we have a lot that we can do and contribute in those spaces.
It's definitely part of building that wider business culture. It can't just be within IT. And one of the things I loved about that story you were telling is when you're like, let's just go for a walk because we sit in front of our computers all the time and actually like going for a walk with someone, being outside, working together side by side, it takes away that kind of, I'm your boss, scary feeling. And I think these things you wouldn't technically associate with cyber and IT, like going outside for a walk to talk about your life and how you're feeling, can actually be some of the greatest things to build cybersecurity teams. And, things like away days, etc., they're so powerful in that team building. We can get bogged down in the technology when, like you said, it is about the people, the process as well. So going back to kind of your work at National Highway, what is one of the things that you're most proud of all of the work you've done there?
Well, I would say so. My predecessor, Philomena, she really built the team from scratch. So it's something that I have a lot of experience with. And so coming in and inheriting such a great security team was not a normal thing for me. I felt a little bit strange, if I'm honest. And obviously, we were still continuing to build our maturity and so forth. But to come into a team that had already had such a great, we talk about the people aspects, the culture, it was really a privilege for me. And in the 2.5 years that I've now been at the helm and leading the security team, I think we've had 2 people leave the team and they wanted to go and try something new and different. And that's fine. I make it well known in my team that if you are looking for something new and Highways isn't scratching that itch, let me know because I know a lot of people in the industry and we might be able to get you a role somewhere that is interesting to you. I'm not a jealous boss. Of course, I would hate to lose our good people, but at the same time, it's important to look after people's own development, their own career path. And quite often people come back, so I've worked with the same people over the years and they went away and did something cool and exciting, or I went away and did something cool. And then we all came back and then we went away again. So for me, I'm really proud that we have, again, this culture and security. We're looking to build more permanency. So hiring more permanent members as we transition from that capital expenditure security build phase to now business as usual operational. And we've had a lot of the contractors say, hey, I'm interested in going perm. And I say, well, hey, okay, that's like a pay cut in half for you. Are you sure? And they're like, well, yeah, the pay is important, but it's also really important that I have a place that I thoroughly enjoy working and a team that I, again, trust and feel confident to stay in as a permanent team member. So I'm really proud that we have folks from across Highways that come to me and say, have you got anything in security? I'd really like to come and try and work in security. Can I do a secondment 6 months maybe and try out your security team? Early talent people. So we have a really good early talent program at National Highways. And I've always got graduates and apprentices and interns coming and saying, oh, can I try out working the security, the SOC or the GRC? Just give it a go. It sounds really exciting. And, my classmates worked with you for 6 months and had nothing but good things to say. So I'm really proud of the reputation we have, again, not just within Highways, but across British government and into our supply chain too, as we work very well with some of our suppliers. Again, having this trusting relationship and making sure that we're looking after their people who are seconded into our team. So that's probably the one thing I am most proud of.
I think the fact that people come back is such a testament to like what you've built. And again, it contributes to what you were saying at the start about diversity. If you have all the same people who've worked in the same company and you all just work and you don't have any mixture of opinion and actually going out, going somewhere new, learning something new, and then bringing it back is how you build an even more powerful team. So that's fantastic. And you've touched upon third party suppliers. And that is a key topic in the industry at the moment. And with the concern around third party breaches, etc., because it could go 2 ways. People could come really like strict and stingent on their third parties, very like, be like this, do this, do this, or that in maybe in some ways could potentially damage relationships. What advice do you have to people who need to, navigate being firmer with their third parties, but also, like you said, kind of maintaining that relationship that maintains your culture?
Yeah, so at Highways, as an example, we have supplier relationships that are decades old,
Mm.
since the dawn of the highway. And we have technology that is similarly decades old. And so, to be fair to those suppliers, back when they installed the thing on the side of the road or back when they implemented the IT service or whatever it was, cyber wasn't a thing. So, what it really boils down to, and I think this probably goes across industries, is you have to have a no blame culture with your supply chain. Because as we saw with the likes of JLR, it was the breach of JLR that caused the problems for the downstream supply chain, which is sort of a new thing. Previously, it was, oh, our supplier got breached and that had an impact on us, the tier one or the or the customer. And JLR really showed that when a tier one is breached, the huge impacts it has. I mean, the UK GDP suffered by 1.2 billion because of that one breach. And it was, potentially having a huge impact. So by fostering communications and a no blame culture and sharing information. So quite often you will see organizations will have security working group, and they meet once a month or once a quarter, and they go through the minutes of the meeting, and and it's a checkbox exercise. Nobody really wants to be there. The supplier is never really truthful. When you see a supplier security questionnaire, they're probably not all that truthful, but they need to answer a certain way to get the contract, right? So it's harmful to start a relationship right off the bat with a new contractor who is, I'll say, fibbed. I'll be kind and say fibbed on their security questionnaire. But what's more important then is that you build a collaborative environment, a trusting environment, no blame culture with your suppliers, because what you want to enable is a real day-to-day engagement with those suppliers. You want them to feel if something bad happens that they're going to come to you, let you know, so that you can all work to solve the issue. Versus quite often the legal team will say, no, don't tell anybody anything because we got to maintain, we got to keep our dirty laundry in house and so forth. I think the cyber security and resilience bill that's coming out is looking to address some of that. I think the reporting timeframes might be a little bit too stringent, but just the topic of supplier engagement, it really has to be. I mean, similarly, you have to bring them into your circle of trust. You have to be able to respond to each other, and as a customer, you have to be fair to those suppliers, because again, we may get a new thing like secure by design, or some new government initiative or whatever it might be. And the suppliers go, oh, what's this going to cost us now? Because there's an expectation that they too implement it, but they have a cost in implementing that. And as the customer, we have to say, okay, maybe we don't insist that they implement it in the one, financial year. Maybe we be more fair and say, okay, as long as there's progress made on this new thing over the years into BAU, we can reduce the costs to the supplier. If as a customer, you're seen to be looking out for their commercial interests as well, you also tend to have a much better, less conflict relationship, because at the end of the day, that's what suppliers, they're there to have a profit and a revenue and a happy shareholder in some cases. So again, as customers, we have to be careful not to seem too needy. And we might be one of hundreds of customers for them too, right? So we can't, again, it's about being less precious, maybe feeling a little less special and more even with our supply chain, have that even relationship.
I've never had that take, but it makes a lot of sense. And you've held like different roles. You've held like VCSO roles, internal. Do you think having all these different seats at the table has contributed to this quite wise, pragmatic, very like understanding everyone's priorities take on things?
For sure, because I mean, in my military days, I just had this big red no stamp, and I treated suppliers terribly back then, because I was just a security at all costs kind of guy. Like, I've got these regulations, they tell me what has to be done, and I'm going to hold it to the letter of it, and I'll interpret it to the academic, the penultimate academic definition. And then I left the military and my first went into private sector, and I went onto the consulting side. And so I was over in the UAE as a consulting director, and I was working with oil and gas, renewable energy, nuclear energy, government, military, banking, telecoms. And I went in and I tried that thing where I was like, no, you can't do that. And they looked at me and they're like, yeah, he can leave. Like, I was uninvited to a meeting, and I says, oh, I don't have this in my calendar. And they're like, oh, don't worry about it, Keith. We don't need you there. And I'm like, oh no, I've already made myself. So I learned really quickly that the old ways, again, when you're on the other side, when you're on the sales side, when you're providing a service and you're a supplier, that's where I learned what a jerk I had been all those 20 years. And it's sort of like I had this, it was like a baptism. I came out of the water and I was like, oh, okay, now I'm the other guy, I'm the other person on the other side of the table. And so, yes, to your question, having that, and then working in Deloitte and briefly at Little Fish and some of these others, as well as working as an internal CISO, as an external, as a supplier, I think every CISO should do some time in that world so that they get a better understanding. And I'm quite renowned for, I wouldn't say I'm mean to suppliers, but like the cold calling and that stuff, I'm not a big fan of. But if I think something looks interesting, I'll reach out, and we'll have a conversation and it'll be respectful and so forth. But it's still very difficult because you get swamped with so much stuff. And what I would say to suppliers is here's a little trick. Here's a little tidbit. Look at the layer one or two down from the CISO as your starting point for communications. And I'm not saying that the CISOs are like this precious, you can't approach them and yada, yada, yada. But at big organizations, the heads of, or the next layer down even from the heads, those are really the points that you want to get in, start having the conversation. Because what happens is those people look at you and two or three of your competitors in the same space. They make a selection or they pick one or two, and then they go to the CISO and they present the options. And the CISO rarely even chooses. The CISO just says, oh, this is my opinion on these two and da da da. But a CISO will be part of the decision-making process, but they rely heavily on those heads of senior architects or senior engineers, the people that are in the trenches. Those are the ones as a supplier or vendor you want to approach first.
It's all about the team. Like, that's one of the biggest takeaways I'm getting from this episode is it's all about the team. We focus so much on the CISO or the technology, but it is, when it comes down to it, it's about that team and the problem. And, what are they trying to solve? What are the things they're dealing with on a day to day and the pressures they're facing? So that's really, in a world that is sort of, I would say, the amount of times I've seen the word AI today, it has been ridiculous. And it's not even midday. And in a world where we're talking about agents and workflows and automation, we're coming so close to forgetting about the team, about the people. And I think that's why I really enjoyed this, is going back to it and talking about the team. So, as a kind of final sort of question, Keith, what is one thing? So let's say, a head of IT is listening to this, a CISO, and they are coming away from this episode with a breath of fresh air and they want to relook at how they work, relook at their team. Where would you say they should begin?
Oh, well, so for me, in my experience, the greatest return on investment from a security program has always come in the space of employee engagement, employee awareness. It's kind of traditionally for CISOs, it's a space where you're sort of like, I've got to do it. I'll make them take a annual training course online. And we all know that everybody just clicks through it and everyone shares the cheat sheet to pass the test at the end. And then every once in a while, we'll throw phishing simulations at people to test our employees and so forth. And that's not a great way to build the security culture. Before the show, I mentioned that I am an advisor for a company called the Cyber Escape Room, and they deliver engagement, right? They deliver engagement to employees where it's so fun and so interesting and so unique that even after one session, the employees tend to go away and go, hey, this thing over here, it actually doesn't look right. Like it's been there the whole time. And we've just sort of like, yeah, that's the way it's always been. But the reality is it's not very safe or secure. And so I want to raise it up through my bosses and I want to raise it through the security team. We had a couple examples at Highways. In fact, we had one very recently where our finance department is targeted heavily for obvious reasons. And you can't stop all the phishing emails. You can't stop all the social engineering. But what you can do is you can prepare those finance people to have a security mind, a security awareness through engagement. Then they ask the questions. They become the security sensor. And we've had a few instances where they've reported an email supposedly from a supplier that has said, hey, that 2 million invoice, please send it to this bank. It's our new bank, da 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 da. And the finance person was like, that doesn't pass the sniff test. They report it to the security operations center. The investigation's done, and it's found to be an attacker, a criminal trying to get us to send, and it ended up being, I want to say we're up to about 2.8 million in avoided fraudulent payments to cyber criminals. So again, the Cyber Escape Room, they offer various, they offer in-person events, which are really fun, different themes from, the breach to an OT offering. They have vishing, which is voice AI, voice cyber attack, kind of like what happened to us in JLR with Scattered Spider. They have the thing called space, where they'll come out and build you a train. And they'll build you this massive set to where you can deliver your cyber education to your employees. And again, it's about making something that's engaging for the employees so that when they go away, they spread the word. They share the word of what's going on in the employee engagement space. And that increase in employee engagement directly leads to improved awareness. And again, if you can talk about people's teenagers and grandparents and all that stuff as well, that's really the important stuff to most human beings. It's not, did you properly classify this document at work? Most people go, I don't care. Sure. But if you talk about their teenagers or their kids on TikTok, or if you talk about their grandparents having a password notebook, which is a good idea for grandparents, by the way, they will bring that awareness and engagement back with them into work.
Is that light on moment when you see it when you're talking to someone? Like if you were talking to them about their MFA, their password hygiene, and their work laptop, they just go, it goes over their head. Yeah, exactly. They go straight to sleep. Whereas as soon as you start talking about how they keep their personal home device safe or how they can help their kids online, like you see that light bulb moment of MFA, by the way, that's that code you get. And it's like, oh, that's what that is. And I was like, yeah, it's so good. Because imagine if someone tried to get into this account. Or the one thing I always tell people as well is have a safe word. So, like, because I get this all the time. It's like, hi, mum, new number. I think my mum has had like 5 phones already this year by how many texts I've got. But it will be like, if you have a safe word in your family, it's such a great way to just, say the safe word. And that's when you can send money. And I think that type of thing, that's what they care about. So start with that. Don't start with what, your password hygiene at work.
Yeah, and it's you just highlighted the importance of analog solutions for digital problems.
Mm.
So, M&S, a great example, their whole digital capabilities were obliterated. And so they had to go back, like we say, back to the Stone Age, but, paper and pen and binders and whatever you got to do to keep the business going. But if you have that in place and you practice it and build the muscle memory, how you're going to continue to operate, because like at highways, we don't have the luxury in a cyber attack to go, all right, we're going to shut down all the motorways until we've recovered. That's not an option for us. We have to continue to operate. And so resilience is turning into one of these words that is overused. But what it means is you might have a traffic officer on the side of the road with a torch and a radio and some cones. And that's how we continue to maintain that motorway while we're under a cyber attack, and we do it safely. And same thing for every business. And safety is very important to most businesses, but also maintaining the operations of the business while the cyber attack is actually happening is where organizations are now shifting focus. And again, it's analog solutions for those digital problems, because you just might not have any other option.
Fantastic. And I think that's a brilliant note to end on. This has been a great conversation, Keith. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Katie. I appreciate the invitation, and hopefully, I've given some good advice that can be used for others. And if anybody ever wants to have a chat, I love talking with people. I travel across the country with my job, and so I'm usually in various cities, and I love to sit down and have coffee and lunch and chat with people. But thank you, Katie, for today.
And that's a wrap on today's episode of Cybersecurity in Focus, the podcast brought to you by Seacon Cyber. A big thank you to Keith. If one thing came through in this conversation, it is that the strongest security programs are built on trust. Trust within your team and trust within your supply chain. If this episode gave you something to think about, share it with a colleague. And if something particular stood out to you, please let us know what that was in the comments. We'll be back next week with another episode. See you soon.